Well, I can't say that I didn't call this. I mean, realistically, I didn't, but kind of expected it, really. We have another PDS tornado ongoing just east of DeQuincy, Louisiana. This is moving off toward Reeves. Uh, so the actual warning, this is a radar confirmed particularly dangerous situation. 5:10 Central Standard Time. It was located near Gillis or near Ragley, moving northeast at 60 miles per hour. This will have just should be just passing Ragley as we speak. Reeves will be impacted in 10 minutes. Dry Creek and LeBlanc around 5:30, and Harmony around 5:35. To repeat, a large, extremely dangerous, and potentially deadly tornado is on the ground. You need to move to shelter now to protect your life and property if you can. However, life is always more important, so please take your essentials, get to shelter now. Do not wait. I am once again. I am Rishi. Let's see here. Did that work? It did not, unfortunately. Okay. So once again, I am Rishi. I am going to take you through this PDS tornado, and once it is over, what I'm probably going to end up doing is I'm going to leave this stream up and running until someone is able to do a handoff, at which point I will cease being the host of the live stream and we will be streaming from another member of the team. We this I'm only just now thinking this is probably a good idea. Probably should have done it before, seeing as how it's been only half an hour since the last stream. But um, sadly, weather doesn't wait, so neither do we. Again, a confirmed large, extremely dangerous tornado was located over Ragley just a few minutes ago, and it is still ongoing. To give a sense as to this tornado, it began around about 10 minutes ago, and very quickly the debris signature grew as it continued northeastward. It does appear that the debris signature is stretching out now, which is a good sign. That means the tornado was likely weakening. But unfortunately, we have all these other mini supercells to deal with as they come on shore. So it's very likely that we will have some other things to deal with once everything is set in motion. So I'll be relaying information from the team as time goes on. Hopefully, everything will work out. So it looks like we had an update to the tornado warning that includes Lake Charles. That one is still radar indicated. I'm assuming is for this circulation here near West Lake. It might also be for this one for Lake Charles proper. But we do still have this tornado warning to deal with, so this is the one that we're going to be focusing on. It looks like the tornado debris signature is kind of splitting, but split likely just false. It is more than likely actually spreading out. So this tornado is likely starting to lift off of the ground. Hopefully it does. That way we don't have to worry about it really for too much longer. So, but we will see what happens here over the next few minutes here. Let's see here. Anything else coming off the Gulf that we need to worry about? Not quite yet, thankfully. We do have a lot of supercells trying to develop, though, which could be a bad thing, but it could also be a good thing. If there's too many supercells, then they'll crowd each other out, and we won't really get too much activity from the prefrontals. We'll only get activity from the QLCS line. But yes, yeah, okay, so yeah, the couplet doesn't look like it's too good anymore. It's definitely spreading out. It looks like it's trying to become a line. So that's good. This tornado is likely weakening, if not already lifted. But overall, everything it looks like it's on track. Just gonna go in and have a look at something internally. Do stand by. I apologize. Okay. So, but overall, everything looks like it is. I don't know. It looks like this tornado was relatively short-lived, thankfully, but it is still registered as a PDS tornado. So we are going to continue our coverage of the system, at least until it decides that it wants to no longer be a worry. So, but until the NWS downgrades us to radar indicated or cancels the warning, we will stay with you as time goes on. It does sound like I'm joined by someone. Hello, Kay. Welcome on in. How are you doing this fine evening?
Hello, I am fairly frustrated by this event because, first of all, it's January, and we've already had a big January event, a deadly January event earlier in the month, and I would really appreciate it if the weather remembered it was winter and stopped producing outbreaks as if it were March. But for this event specifically, we had that significant tornado which produced a tornado emergency in the Houston metro area. That was expected. Strong tornadoes were likely today, according to the SPC. We've probably seen at least one strong tornado today. But the warm sector was supposed to move almost entirely offshore as it went into Louisiana. And the threat was supposed to become almost non existent until we approached southeastern Louisiana later in the day. Yesterday, there wasn't even a hatched tornado risk for where the tornadoes are currently happening. It was the gap between the two enhanced regions. They joined them up this morning. It seems just to be, not for any particular reason, just to make it continuous. And it's verifying remarkably well. I was not expecting there to be this many tornadoes in this part of the risk.
I mean,
It's my understanding that there would be very limited tornado potential once the focus moved beyond the Houston metro, and yet we've seen at least half a dozen likely touchdowns in far eastern Texas and Louisiana so far. If this continues, we could see continuous tornado touchdowns as we go along I-10 into Lafayette, Baton Rouge, and New Orleans. Hopefully, it calms down at some point, but the environment's currently good enough for tornadoes, and the storms will keep producing until the environment gets worse.
and let's hope that happens soon. Unfortunately, SEC did outline that 10% significant tornado risk all the way out to the Florida Panhandle, and given the pace of the line, it looks like we got at least a good 6-8 hours left in this event. Which,
Oh, this event is going to continue all the way through into tomorrow's event. It's a continuous threat of tornadoes, but it was supposed to temporarily move offshore. And as everyone can see, it stayed on shore. It went farther north than the model suggested, which, while being noted as a possibility, was expected to be farther north to the east. It wasn't expected to go this far north at this particular part of the risk region. I wouldn't be surprised if one or more of these tornadoes that have been confirmed by radar have happened outside of the enhanced risk region. I don't have an exact comparison to close enough resolution
and,
to check out how it lines up exactly.
and
I don't
unfortunately,
have the software either.
even though I could potentially do that, it looks like there's too much ingest on the server side, so I can't even check myself.
There's too many people looking at the storms.
Most likely, I'm gonna have to wait until tomorrow to do some analysis of that kind. But yeah. So what do you think really is sustaining these storms then? So are the conditions out here is overperforming, or do you think the shear is just insanely high enough
The
that they
shear
don't care about the
is
pay?
incredible. It's one of the highest um, shear parameter spaces that I've ever seen, that a lot of people have seen. Certainly in the last decade, there aren't many events which have had equivalent or higher shear within the warm sector. Um, the moisture, while limited due to the time of year, has, in my opinion, overperformed. And but even without substantial moisture, the shear is so extreme and the storms are happening in just the right way that they're getting enough moisture flowing into them to produce tornadoes. If this had happened with, say, 2 degrees cooler conditions, we might have not seen a single tornado so far. It's a very marginal situation, but unfortunately, it's on the active side of that fine line.
Understood there. And just as a quick update, the PDS has been downgraded to radar indicated. So the tornado has lifted as it passed by Reeves. This is as of 5 minutes ago. It's still moving northeast at 60 miles an hour. So if it decides to drop another, it can. It still has a little bit of time. Not a lot, but a little. Um, and just for your reference, K, the, let's see, the tornado that touched down near Beaumont was well within the 10 sig. So that is not at all. That's not at all a surprise. The one near Mauriceville and Cove and Orange, that one was also well within the 10 sig. And the latest PDS touchdown initially um, looks about halfway
North
between
of Lake
the.
Charles.
Yep, it looks to be halfway between the 5% and 10% contours. And it is current. The storm itself, the tornado itself, looks to have lifted right as it got to the edge of the 5%.
Well, at least something's right.
Yeah,
If it's lifted as it got to the edge of that. Um,
let us hope that's the case as the event continues on, shall we? As we
Indeed. So, this most recent PDS tornado touchdown
touchdown
south
just outside of
east southeast
DeQuincy.
of DeQuincy, which is in a little square county.
Mm-hmm.
So it was actually this most recent PDS tornado touched down well into the slight risk outside of the enhanced risk. So either this tornado is doing strange things on the warm front, which is possible, or the moisture has come farther north than anticipated. We'll have to wait until after the event to see which one it was. I'll take a quick look at meso-analysis, see what's going on.
Absolutely. And while you're doing that, I'll give some updates as to what's going on. We do have, let's see, we have a rather large severe thunderstorm warning that encompasses the tornado warning as well. This is still obviously tornado possible for hail the size of nickels and 60-mile-an-hour 60-mile-an-hour winds. It includes a lot of cities, but I-10 between mile markers 1 and 52, and I-210 between 1 and 12. Many counties in southern Louisiana. I'm not going to bother reading all because there's way too many. However, this will be in effect until 5:45 p.m. Central Standard Time, so that's in 15 minutes. They will likely issue another one of these warnings in just a moment. There is a new flash flood warning, however. This one includes Lake Charles and Beaumont. So, or it's not new, but it still is there. This is from 4:30 Central, so it is about an hour old, but it is still in effect for another 2 hours. 1 to 3 inches of rain have already fallen, and another 1 to 3 inches is at least forecast. So Lake Charles area, you're definitely not out of the woods yet in terms of weather impacts. You could very easily see that, and we just got a new tornado watch. I don't have the probabilities, but I do have our primary threats. So this is Tornado Watch number 28, issued at 5:25 p.m. Central Standard Time. This is a tornado watch that includes for southern Louisiana and the coastal waters. It is effective until Wednesday morning, 1 a.m. Central Standard Time. This will include, or primary threats include, a few tornadoes likely and a couple intense tornadoes possible, with scatter damaging winds for 70 miles an hour possible. Potential for storms capable of producing tornadoes and damaging winds will continue to develop east-northeastward across southern Louisiana this evening as a moist and unstable air mass works its way inland and northward in the presence of very strong winds through a deep layer. So once we have the probabilities, we will let you know about that. I'm not expecting it to be much higher than the previous one. The previous tornado watch was a 60-40 for tornadoes. I don't think this one's going to be too much higher.
This one is 60-50.
So it's 60-50. So a little higher. They did nudge up the probabilities for a strong EF2 plus tornado, or for 2 or more EF2 plus, if I remember correctly.
The reason why they've done that is likely when they issued the first watch, we weren't certain whether any significant tornadoes would touch down. We knew the parameter space was there. We knew the environment could support it if we had forecasted it right. But in such a delicate setup where a slight change in the moisture completely removes any tornado threat, you have to be conservative, wait for the event to prove one way or the other how it's going to behave. And in this case, we've seen plenty of significant tornadoes. Confidence that the environment will verify is up, and so we've had a 10% increase even as we move out of the best conditions of the event. That's not to say that the strongest tornado has already happened. It's entirely possible that we could have a stronger tornado yet to come. In previous events, that this happened at this time of year, also into early spring, you may have some moderate tornadoes in the first half of the event where there's plentiful moisture available. But then as you go into the overnight hours and it gets cooler, the storms are already going. They don't need that initial burst of energy to form, and they can produce violent tornadoes even when the conditions are very minimal. As long as there is some moisture in the atmosphere, they can produce tornadoes. And we have seen time and time again that violent tornadoes are possible when there is high amounts of wind shear and storms move out of a region of sufficient instability. As long as those storms keep going, there's the potential for strong tornadoes to continue. So, as always, you need to have a way to get warnings, especially with this being an overnight threat that will continue to produce tornadoes, in all likelihood, into the daylight hours tomorrow. You need to have a way to wake up if you're in the risk region ahead of this line, and you go to sleep. You need to have a way to be woken up if a warning is issued for your location.
Absolutely. And even though National Weather Services are able to send alerts to your phone, I mean, I know I sometimes don't wake up to my first alarm. So make sure you have at least another way to get warnings. That can be either you leave your TV on, because it doesn't matter what volume you have it set to, it plays at full volume. Then there's also a NOAA weather radio. Those are 100%. They always go off for any sort of warning. I think
as long as you set them up right.
Exactly. But once it's set right, you are good to go. Those will wake you up every single time.
Apart from the very rare instances where a tornado directly strikes a radio transmission tower, in which case you might want to make sure you have a backup. But that doesn't happen very often. The most prominent example, of course, would be the super outbreak when I think 500,000 to 1 million people were without significant warning because they had no power and the transmission towers were damaged. But that's not very likely to happen. That happens very rarely because you have to be super lucky to hit this one tower in a massive area, of course.
Okay.
And weather radios specifically, are the number one way to receive a tornado warning. But it's always good to have a backup, no matter what your source is. If your main source is the TV, your phone can be good. If your main source is the phone, if you have someone who can call you who has a warning set up, that's great. But you should try and find a backup just in case your primary source goes down. The most dangerous time for a tornado to happen is at night. It's very well known in our community, at least, the people giving you the information, that tornadoes at night are more likely to be fatal because people are asleep and can't take action, and not everyone wakes up in time, if at all. But hopefully the tornadoes start to die down soon, and hopefully we see things improve from what we've seen so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, so, yeah, the situation definitely is not ideal. We certainly really hope that the tornado threat dies down a lot quicker than they're thinking it will. I mean, we especially don't want to see the tornado threat going all the way into the Florida Panhandle like they're thinking it might. But
The tornado threat certainly will go that far east, but whether there are still tornadoes happening at that point is another matter. We may get a couple of warnings with no touchdowns, which would be scary but nice, nicer than the warnings verifying. On a positive note, the long tracking embedded supercell that's been producing PDS tornadoes since it was in Texas has, by the looks of it, gone outflow dominant, crossed the surface warm front. That PDS seems to be its last one. It's no longer tornado warned, and it looks to have just gusted itself out after that last tornado, which is great. It also gives us a very good indication of where the northern extent of the tornado potential is. I would say that it's right along the Reeves, Kinder, Elton, Basil, Eunice line. About, let's get a distance on this. About 20 miles north of I-10 is the northernmost extent of a tornado potential right now, based on where this storm went elevated. And that's where the surface warm front is. That's where the instability stops. It's where the moisture becomes too low to produce tornadoes. But any point south of that, particularly along I-10, anyone traveling on I-10, you're going to have tornado potential for the foreseeable future. The storms have moved through Lake Charles, so Lake Charles and points west in the clear for tornadoes. But everywhere east, particularly approaching between Lake Charles and Lafayette right now, tornado potential is maximizing. There is a tornado warning for parts of that section of I-10, primarily focused on Lake Arthur, with a rotation, a broad rotation, but a rotation nonetheless, approaching Lake Arthur. This could spin up quite quickly. It seems to be a developing circulation. Unfortunately, if this does put down a tornado, I reckon the amount of time it would take to fully wrap up and produce would be about the amount of time it takes to get to I-10. So hopefully it weakens and dies rather than strengthening. But if it decides to put down a tornado, it's going to be crossing, this storm will be crossing I-10 in the next 20 to 30 minutes.
that's a good estimate. They say it's moving at 45 miles an hour, and it's about 20 miles away if you kind of draw its vector. So, yeah, about 15, 25 minutes, somewhere in there, it should be crossing I-10. But thank you for pulling out that tornado warning. Excuse me. Looking in the chat here, we have someone mentioning how the situation is down there. 4 to 6 hours. Looks like mesoscale analysis is showing somewhere between 500 and 1,000 joules per kilogram in southeast Louisiana. Which, honestly, given how everything's moving right now, does not surprise me. And that is plenty of, especially with the amount of shear in place, that is plenty of energy to keep these storms going. So,
well, let's look at what it's like right now. I'm going to use 3 kilometer mixed layer CAPE, or 3 CAPE as it is known. this is a more useful index on a day like this, where we have marginal instability through the whole atmosphere, but strong instability right at the surface. And it is a very limited warm sector. As we discussed, it's just through this small area of southwest Louisiana, hardly onshore, not getting much farther north than I-10. But there is enough instability at this time for storms right along the cold front and just ahead of it, where the current tornado warning is, to potentially produce tornadoes. If we go forward 2 hours, the moisture right at the surface decreases, but then it comes back onshore. So around 2 hours from now, the tornado threat should be diminished because instability is expected to decrease. But then 4 hours from now, it comes back. And 6 hours from now, the tornado threat will be maximized in the New Orleans metro area. So, particularly, so it's a fair way out, but around 5 hours from now, the tornado threat will start rapidly increasing for the New Orleans metropolitan area. 4 hours from now, the maximum threat will be areas south and potentially up to Baton Rouge. But basically, the deal with tonight, until we get to New Orleans, is if you are on I-10, you're in the tornado threat. Even if the moisture decreases, you could still get a potential spin up. And it doesn't take much of a tornado to knock a weak tree over, put it through your roof, and cause serious injuries if it happens to come through the part of your house or mobile home that you are in. It's not something that you want to take a chance with. So if you're in a tornado warning, regardless of where you are, if you're in the part of Louisiana, central Louisiana, where moisture is expected to be at its lowest for the whole event, don't take that as oh, we're fine, it can only happen on the coast, it's going south of us and east of us will be good. Never say things like that with weather, because time and time again we get proven wrong. Our understanding is not good enough to perfectly predict tornadoes, as evidenced by the fact that the chances were increased once we saw what was happening. There wasn't enough confidence before the event started to say with absolute certainty there will be tornado touchdowns in Southeast Texas and Louisiana tonight. We couldn't say that for certain. We were very, very confident, but it was quite a lot of uncertainty that we'd see strong tornadoes at all. And again, that can happen with any event. But just don't take chances with dangerous, severe weather like this. Taking chances is the number one way to get yourself seriously injured or worse. So play it safe and live to do whatever you like to do another day.
Yeah, absolutely. All those words definitely ring true. Uh, yeah, I gotta say, I'm still very surprised at just how volatile this event has been. But looking at the radar, um, at least in terms of what's like currently happening, um, I do think at least in the short term we're gonna have a lot of brief spin ups. We're not gonna have anything that's particularly long tracking. Just because all these supercells that are coming on shore are coalescing into a line, like within, I think it's maybe 10 miles of the cold front here. So
Mm-hmm.
these storms aren't really going to be able to have much time to do anything before they get absorbed by the cold front in that line.
The tornado warn storm has weakened. Hopefully, it stays that way and doesn't try to re-strengthen. But once this warning expires, once we're confident nothing is going to happen to I-10 in the immediate future, we will go away again, and hopefully there won't be reason for us to come back for the rest of the event. Hopefully we've had all the PDS and tornado emergencies, but
There's still a lot of major
unfortunately,
cities in the way,
with the
unfortunately.
threat expected to go back into populated regions, we can't say with any certainty what will or won't happen.
So at least for at least at first, what I'm gonna do with this stream is I will leave it up on the break screen. So that way, in case we do get something within like the next, say, hour, we don't have to restart a whole new stream. We can just come right back to this one and we'll be okay. However, after that point, we'll be stopping the stream, assuming nothing else crazy has happened, and then we will rinse and repeat. If a PDS happens, we will try to come back online if we have to. That being again for PDS or tornado emergencies, or if there is anything else that we are noticing that is going to be a major disruption to life and property down here in the south. So we're going to continue watching this over, for the next little while here, probably at the top of the hours when we're going to do that transition. Um, until then, we're going to monitor this tornado warning as well as all these little storms that are coming up on shore from the Gulf of Mexico, and keep posted on what exactly is going on and how the night is expected to progress. One thing that I do want to point out, however, something that has been that might be overlooked by some, is the wind threat, especially once we get past New Orleans. So up to this point, the gusty wind threat has not been a major concern with these storms. It has been a concern, to be sure. 15% risk was been introduced, but there is also this red contour here, which does pretty much include Baton Rouge and itself, as well as New Orleans, as well as the cities of Gulfport, Pensacola, Mobile. Um, all these cities are in 30% wind risk. So that means that there's a 30% chance of some location within 25 to 50 miles of you seeing winds in excess of 60 miles an hour. There may be some isolated instances of even higher values than that, but thankfully at this point they are not seeing a high enough chance for hurricane plus force winds. That being said, though, it doesn't take a hurricane force wind to be able to blow down a tree or be able to pull some small structures apart. So do keep that in mind, especially because these winds are going to be super confined in space. They're not going to be, huge wind fields. They're going to be very, very small. So very small areas might see some straight line wind damage. Other areas might not. Kind of the same with tornadoes. Tornadoes are very small, relatively speaking. Some areas will see tornado damage, other areas will not. Only time will tell exactly where these things happen and whether or not this will verify. However, as this line gets past Baton Rouge, it is important to remember that tornadoes will not be the primary threat at that point. They'll share responsibility being primary threat with wind. Yes, to anybody else who is in this stream, however, if you have comments, questions, concerns, shoot them our way. Tag us if you want. It just helps us to see them a little faster because it glows nice bright yellow on our screen. Otherwise, you can feel free to just ask whatever questions are on your mind. We'll do our best to answer them. Or if you want to share some information that you have that we may have missed or that we may not have seen yet, you are more than welcome to share that information in the chat window, so long as it is, not a sketch link, I guess is the best way to put it. So, okay, if I were to ask you where, apart from our single tornado warning, as at this moment, where would you be focusing on for the greatest near-term threat?
In the near term, we have two lines. The left-hand line appears to be weakening substantially. It may be being undercut by the cold front. It appears that the tornado threat has transitioned to this new line that's formed a little bit to the east of the original line. I don't think tornadoes are possible anywhere other than this line for the time being, just due to how marginal the moisture is. As we've come far enough east to leave behind the significant moisture that we had earlier in Texas, that's all offshore in the Gulf of Mexico now. Quite marginal moisture onshore at this time, and basically, if the storm is not in this line, there isn't enough focusing of that moisture for a substantial tornado.
Understood there. Understood there. So hopefully that continues to be the case, at least for the next few hours, so that hopefully uh, the worst that people have to deal with are those straight line winds, um, which at this point seems sub-severe. There are some special weather statements as far north as Jackson and Yazoo City in Mississippi. Um, these are uh, for penny-sized hail. They're not even for strong winds anyway. So there is some stuff happening further north, but they're not severe in any way. They definitely are still producing some stronger wind, some small hail, and nothing really that's worth focusing on at this point, just because they aren't too
Well,
damaging.
nothing short term, but they are producing a lot of rain. I expect those flash flood warnings to be extended eastwards.
That is
And if
good.
you are anywhere near, if you're in a region that gets flooded when you get a lot of rain, you should be aware that that's likely to happen with this system as it moves through.
Amen to that. All right, so I think what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna switch it over to the break right now. If something happens between now and the top of the hour, we'll come back. Otherwise, we'll leave the stream up until the top of the next hour, which will be 7 o'clock Central Time. So hopefully this will be the last time that we have to go live tonight, but we will still be vigilant in case the need arises again. So thank you to everyone who has come by so far. We're gonna leave it on the break screen now. We will come back at the top of the hour if needed. Stay safe, and well, yeah, stay safe. Take care.